I'm Maya. I'm Sam, Shambhavi, but you can call me Sam. I'm Rachel.
I'm Jonathan.
And we decided, after listening to Dr. Hinshaw's talk on stigma, that really inspired our group, and so we wanted to research stigma more. Before we get into the details and the topics we chose to discuss stigma, I just wanted to clarify what exactly stigma is. So stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. So as the diagram shows here, stigma can relate to any of these labels, so discrimination, stereotyping, just so that somebody has a position of power over you. Stigma are opinions and thoughts that have been deeply intertwined into our society and have become societal norms. Stigma has been passed down from one generation to another in families, and so that we end up subconsciously stigmatizing or stereotyping against people or things. We stigmatize things because we don't have the knowledge that we need, or we don't understand something, and so we form myths or legends about these things. So we each picked a specific topic under the autism, that affects autism ASD, and we're going to talk about that. Yeah. So our first topic is about voting, and the article we read is called "Mentally Incompetent to Vote: How Adults with Severe Autism Are Systematically Disfranchised." And so the law in California is you have to be able to be a guardian to be able to vote. And so they defined in the article mentally incompetent as someone who cannot communicate without accommodations. And so they decided that if you cannot communicate without accommodations, you can't vote, which seems very unfair. And so in the article they said that adults with autism who are verbally or cognitively blessed can gain the right to vote. So they don't outright have the right to vote, they have to go to court, file an appeal or something, and get the right to vote. And so people with more severe autism don't have that right, they just don't go and fight it because they cannot communicate without accommodations.
So in California alone, 2% of all males born in the state now end up as an autism case in the developmental services system. So this means that 120,000 Californians qualify as having developmental services eligible autism. And these individuals, the severely autistic, need informed political representation. Just by the number 120,000, these are massive numbers that matter, and voices that can collectively make a critical difference in the policy matters. And they're a hyper vulnerable population dependent on good government policy. So what can be done is to create a system for proxy voting, and a proxy is usually the conservator, a loving family member that would be entrusted by court to vote in the best interest of the conservative. There is a concern that a proxy would use this in their own abuse their power for their own purpose, but it's a small risk that would be outweighed by the value of adding the severely autistic to the report.
So yeah, the next topic that we wanted to talk about was about autism and violence. The article we read was called "What Does Autism Have to Do with It?" In the article they talked about the statement that people with autism are more violent than other people, and that's just not true. There's reports of people with autism being violent, but these are case studies. In the article they talked about speculation that the Sandy Hook shooter has autism, and this led to people associating his diagnosis or potential diagnosis of autism to his actions that were very violent. So if the Sandy Hook shooter does have autism, they did not commit this act because of it, and it's important to make this distinction so that people do not associate autism with violence. And education around autism can help to reduce stigma and help people with autism get the help and support they need.
The next place that we looked at stigma and autism is in the school setting, so systematic problems. This happens almost in every school, but the case study here in this article was in an Illinois school in Illinois. So the teachers over there use this isolation method as punishment or any form of, like if the student is not following any rules, they would put them in isolation. The rooms usually have like gentle names, so you wouldn't like think that it's for like such severe, harsh treatment. They have names like the quiet room or the reflection room. But inside them, the children are like 5 years old and they're banging on the doors and scratching the walls to let them out. Some of them were even put into the rooms just because like they ripped a piece of paper in class or they didn't want to answer a question kind of thing. And usually the children that end up in these rooms have disabilities and most of them are autistic. The children have gone through so much, they keep screaming to let them out, they like keep their pants in there, they've been, in this case, as you can see, this was his statement, and there is no law on like this rule that schools are allowed to use these seclusion rooms. Like the Congress doesn't really think of it as an important thing. They think that the school teachers are responsible enough to use it when needed, but that clearly isn't the case. And this is like a specific case of a young boy that this happened to, and he was put into the room at like in the morning. He's 9 years old, and he was let out in the afternoon when his grandma came to pick him up. And he was like, it was a really terrible case, and his mom wasn't aware that this happened to him, and the teachers literally stand outside the door and write down what the kid does instead of like opening the door. They have a report, they're like, okay, child screams at this time. And it's a really, really bad thing, and this happens almost to all autistic students that go to like a neurotypical school, and it happens in every school and nobody's doing anything about it. So this is one of the main places where stigma affects us. It's in school settings, and yeah, we need to change that.